30 years ago this year, back in 1991, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System graced the North American shores with what was probably one of, if not the best, gaming consoles of all time. Alongside Sega's Genesis, it spawned a 16-bit rivalry, a 16-bit console war that spawned some of the greatest games of all time. And honestly, who won that war? We did. Gamers did. The Super Nintendo had 3 to 5 launch titles, depending on who you asked, and really where you were. I've heard different reports of what titles were launched when. I've read a bunch of different stuff. I've gotten yelled at it on Twitter for having the wrong launch titles before, but whatever. Doesn't matter. These were Super Mario World, F-Zero, Pilot Wings, Gradius 3, and SimCity. Man, that's a pretty damn good launch title lineup, if you ask me. With the weakest being probably Pilot Wings, and it's still a really good game. Today we'll be looking at some of the best games that the Super Nintendo has to offer, with a bunch of awesome contributors who helped come up with a bunch of videos. This was supposed to have been released months ago, and due to personal reasons I wasn't able to get it out then, but we're getting it out now. We're going to get it out by the end of the year, and because you see all these jump cuts, that's just telling you that I'm a little rusty at this, but we're doing it anyway. So grab a snack, sit back, enjoy the romp through the Super Nintendo library. Super Mario World was the original pack-in game for the SNES. This marked Mario and Luigi's jump from their awesome adventure on the 8-bit NES into 16 bits for the first time. This game is one of the best on the system despite having been released first. With a huge and lively world to explore and tight and precise controls, you just can't go wrong with Super Mario World. It's definitely a must-have for the system, and it's still a must-play for any modern Super Mario fan.
When it comes to the Super NES, there's a lot of games that just fly under the radar despite their high quality. We could spend days on the topic, but let's look at one that truly pushed the hardware. Balls 3. It's a simple one-on-one fight and actually was an early 3D fighter using polygons instead of sprites, despite running on the Super NES. The name was derived by the usage of three-dimensional spheres for the characters, creating the most photorealistic fighter yet seen. The high-definition artwork speaks for itself, as you can very easily tell. Beyond the graphics, the gameplay and the writing are the height of the art form, as just this short scene alone can prove to you. That's not game writing, that is poetry. Every generation has a few games that are so well done they become icons, and Balls 3D should be counted among them. Go play this masterpiece of a game. Hey Tony, I made it all the way through without making any kind of joke about the name. Balls.
Link and Zelda make a massive splash in their only outing for the SNES. Like the majority of Nintendo's first-party titles for the system, this is considered one of the best games of all time. I absolutely adore Link to the Past, and I've loved it since I first saw a Super Nintendo back in 1992. I remember seeing the graphics and hearing the music and thinking, video games will never get better than this. They did, but man, this game is still amazing. Link gets to travel through 2 entire worlds searching for the Master Sword to defeat the evil wizard Aghanim, then crystals to take on Ganon himself, all while battling fierce enemies and solving very fun, if simple, puzzles to get through perilous dungeons. Link to the Past sets the tone for Zelda games for generations to come, and it's one of the best games on the SNES.
Contra 3 rules. I mean, just look at it. Explosions, big guns, bigger bosses, a ton of set pieces, a stiff difficulty curve. I mean, there's just no better way to describe it. It rules. It's like an 80s sci-fi action movie that went direct to video, but somehow had a massive budget because it's absolutely gorgeous. It's adrenaline-fueled, dual-wielding, giant Terminator fighting, missile riding, alien blasting goodness from beginning to end. It's one of the best games in the series, one of the best in its genre, one of the best from a legendary developer Konami, and the best game on the Super NES. At least, it is if you ask me. So, thanks for asking me, Brazel.
One genre that is almost synonymous with the SNES is Japanese RPGs. While they got their start elsewhere, the genre really hit its stride on Nintendo's 16-bit system. Enter the Final Fantasy series. While the first 3 games were definitely good, Final Fantasy IV and VI left their marks on players and helped teach gamers that video games can have awesome stories. I remember the first time I played Final Fantasy IV and being enthralled with the romance and adventure, and really enjoying the battle system and the way the characters would level up and get stronger over the course of the game. Cecil and crew were a new obsession until I played Final Fantasy VI. If you want to hear me gush on about that game, go check out my recent video on it. Final Fantasy IV and VI were defining games on the console for me, and for many others as well.
My choice for the best SNES game is Chrono Trigger. It follows a boy called Chrono and his friends in a sprawling adventure, not just over space, but time as well, in an effort to save all timelines from Lavos, a Lovecraftian horror from beyond the stars. The time-hopping setup allows for a huge range of graphically incredible environments, far beyond the often typically medieval fantasy settings of more traditional RPGs. The soundtrack is not just the best on the SNES, but definitely one of the best of all time, and like the graphics, done in a huge variety of styles to suit every widely varied scene and mood, and there isn't a bad track on the whole OST. Epic is an overused word these days, but Chrono Trigger is epic in every aspect. Graphics, sound, and story, it's the whole package, and is practically a must-play, not just for fans of the SNES, but all gamers with any interest in RPGs.
If you're a longtime viewer of my channel, you know how I feel about Mega Man. Mega Man's jump to 16 bits was beyond excellent. No longer the little blue boy robot we came to know and love on the 8-bit system, Mega Man X introduced a grittier and faster-paced action game that built upon the series' roots. Mega Man X was followed up with Mega Man X2 and X3, and in some ways, those games built even further upon the formula and improved it, though the original game is still the most iconic and probably the best loved. The graphics are amazing, the soundtracks can only be described as metal, and the gameplay is fast-paced and pixel-perfect. If you haven't picked up a Mega Man X game, I implore you to do so. They are some of the best games on the system, if not all time.
Do you want to know how much I love the Metroid series? I have a cat named Ridley. I've played every entry in the series, but my real love for it came from Super Metroid when I was a kid. I play it over and over, and it's still one I go back to at least once a year, and each time I find something new. Sure, the controls and mechanics are a little dated as it was a Super Nintendo game, but the chunky physics and overemphasis of the select button can't take away from that feeling of taking the elevator down to Brinstar for the first time and hearing that music instantly set the mood for the lively new area. Or the brief tease of Meridia through the underwater tunnel that uses nothing but context clues to tell you, I'm gonna go back there later, and I bet I'll get an upgrade that lets me explore underwater. The way the game manages to use minimal text and maximum atmosphere to tell a thrilling tale just through the use of context and environmental storytelling never gets old to me. It's all about those little moments that other games would spell out for you. The dead Federation trooper decomposing outside Kraid's lair. The animals that wordlessly explain to you how to wall jump and shine spark. And then the heartbreaking end of the game with the once baby Metroid now grown up and still bonded with Samus, which does such a good job at showing a compelling payoff for a 3-game relationship between Samus, the Metroids, and Mother Brain, and it does it all without a single line of dialogue. Super Metroid will always be a masterpiece to me, not because it plays perfectly, it doesn't, but because it is a masterclass in atmospheric storytelling in a way that arguably still hasn't been beaten. And the fact that over 25 years later I'm still discovering new secrets in it goes to show how long this game has stuck with me. They just don't make them like this anymore.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. Today I'm here to talk about not only my favorite SNES game, but my favorite game of all time, and that game is Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. The reason I love Super Mario RPG is for so many reasons. One, it's the very first console game I ever beat. But two, it's a really accessible game. It's not a game that's incredibly hard by any means, but is a game that's still a lot of fun. It has a lot of great characters, wonderful mini games, vibrant music that just bounces and is just colorful and energetic. It is a real banging soundtrack. Super Mario RPG is a great starter RPG. If you've never played an RPG in your whole life, I would highly recommend this game. It's familiar, it has familiar characters, and there's so many great, wonderful little moments, like when Mallow finds out he's not a tadpole, or when they go up to Star Hill and Mallow... See, at Star Hill, there's all these people who've wished upon a star, and you can actually read their wishes on these stars on Star Hill. And there's this part where Mallow finds out that his parents were looking for him and wanted him to come home, and that just hits me so differently now that I'm an adult with 2 children. But overall, yeah, this is just my favorite game, honestly. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy. What can I say?
Recently, I played through the original Donkey Kong Country series on the SNES, and man, it still holds up. Some people may not like the pre-rendered graphical style that Nintendo went with here, but I still think it looks pretty damn good. DKC-1 is my favorite of the series, mostly due to nostalgia, but the second game is incredibly iconic, and a favorite for the best game on the system. The third game is a little less well thought of, but I still really enjoy it. All 3 games put you in control of a member of the Kong family and their friends as you explore different detailed locales, collecting hidden items, searching for secret bonus rooms, stomping scaly Kremlings, and attempting to stop King K. Rool, who is always up to something. These are definitely some of the best games on the system.
Earthbound! Has anyone picked it yet? No? Good. Dibs. Dibs on Earthbound. If you can't tell, I love this game. It's my favorite SNES RPG, and I have so much I could say about it, but I don't have a lot of time, so here we go. Earthbound is such a quality game. The writing, excellent. Characters, excellent. Gameplay, good. Tone and style, excellent. Right from the start, you can see this isn't your average 16-bit RPG with its modern setting and characters. Mix in witty dialogue from minor NPCs to key plot points with tons of heart, and Earthbound will have you laughing out loud and slap you into quiet contemplation. On the surface it's silly and colorful, but underneath are some deep themes and threads that add substance you may not expect. The battle system doesn't set the world on fire, but like the story and presentation, it's quirky and clever, with on-screen battles, insta-wins, and a rolling HP meter. As someone who grew up in middle-class rural suburbia, the game resonated with me really well. It's really easy to become attached. I'm avoiding the plot because I want you to play it for yourself, and honestly, it's more about the journey than the beats. I love the humor, the emotion, the friendships. I love the loneliness, the profound, and the existential. I love the feelings that Earthbound leaves me with. It makes me feel at home. Earthbound is everything it sets out to do and does it well. Cure your metaphorical homesickness and play Earthbound.
Hey Brazel, thanks for having me on today. Eric here from Retro Game Remix, and of course, I'm going to tell you why Earthbound is my favorite game of all time. Let's go. Let's talk about the story. The story begins with an unassuming main character named Ness. Ness is awoken by a meteorite crash landing just on a hill behind his house and turns his entire world upside down. Now, through your travels, you have to save the world, of course. Not only that, the NPCs that you interact with have some really strange and quirky dialogue attached to them. I also really love the music. The music is the perfect way to encapsulate a story like this. So whether it's the first track you hear walking around Onett, which is very happy and upbeat, to the very last track that you hear during the final boss and the area that's attached to that, it's incredibly thematic no matter where and when you are. Now, the last thing I really love about Earthbound is the fandom. As you can tell, Earthbound is my favorite game of all time, and it almost has kind of consumed me in a way that I feel very passionate about the game and the other things that surround it. Obviously, it's kind of the weird stepchild of Nintendo that they refuse to acknowledge, but the fan community has really come together and embraced this game and made it something a little bit more than what I think it was intended to be, which is a really great thing. So that's why Earthbound is my favorite game of all time.
Super Mario Kart is a game that kickstarted an entire genre. Combat mascot kart racers weren't really a thing before Nintendo put their most famous mascots into go-karts. Sure, there were similar games where you could collect power-ups and items on a track while racing, but never on this level, and never with mascots driving those vehicles. Super Mario Kart was an incredible time back in the day, with its split-screen gameplay that allowed you to play with a second player simultaneously to either race or battle against each other. While this is definitely not the best game in the series, it's hard to overlook the massive impact it had on gaming as a whole.
Alright, let's talk about Power Rangers on the SNES.
Oh, the first one that came out.
Nope.
The fighting game?
Close.
Oh, the movie game.
Yeah, buddy. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie on the SNES, was the follow-up to the first SNES title, also released by Bandai.
Well, technically a movie title.
I mean, it says Ivan Ooze right there on the title screen.
The game's bosses consist mostly of characters from Season 2 of the show.
You and a friend can pick a teenager with attitude and hit the streets, fighting putties and collecting power-ups to fill meter.
You can use a little bit of meter for a special attack, or you can fill it to max to get yourself into Ranger mode.
Aside from getting you to the real point of the game, you also get powered-up attacks and a health boost.
Which you're probably going to need. This game takes a few runs before you can get through a stage without getting killed.
It also gives you 2 different planes of movement that you can jump between with the press of L or R.
Fuck yeah, Fatal Fury.
It makes for some sweet-looking dodges, too.
And Zords! Oh, right.
Yeah, it's best not to think about that part.
Guess that's what the Fighting Edition is for.
Fuck yeah, Lord Zed!
Even without the Zords, this game is still a blast to play.
While the first SNES game was memorable, I felt this one improved upon it in just about every way.
6 Rangers, 7 stages, 4 continues, 3 lives, 0 fucks given to the laws of physics.
You might even call it...
What? No.
What?
You were supposed to read it off the no.
Should we try a take 2?
Nope. We're done. Sorry, Brazel.
Sorry, Brazel.
Street Fighter II popularized the one-on-one fighters when it was released into arcades in 1991, and when it came to the SNES, Nintendo had a massive leg up on the competition because of the massive popularity of the game. While Street Fighter II is awesome, Street Fighter II Turbo is probably the best iteration of the series of games on Nintendo's 16-bit console. All your favorite fighters are still here, with the ability to play as the 4 bosses from the original Street Fighter II, as well as Turbo Mode, which speeds up combat and makes it that much more fun. An incredibly satisfying game and one I've put countless hours into. Street Fighter II Turbo is one of the best on the system.
Sunset Riders for the Super Nintendo is absolutely my favorite game for the system. No matter how many times I've played it over the years, I just keep coming back to it. I also like this version even better than the arcade original. The player can choose from one of 4 badass bounty hunters, which are Steve, Billy, Bob, and Cormano. Steve and Billy use revolvers, Bob uses a rifle, and Cormano uses double-barreled shotguns. The gameplay loop overall is simple. Run, jump, and slide while shooting at anything that moves until you take down the boss of each stage. This port has some sections that differ from the arcade version, and there's also a few things that have been changed to make things a bit less violent or risque. The bullets and other projectiles move much faster here than in the arcade original, and there's even a hard difficulty that takes this up another notch. There are a few stage sections that take place on horseback, and there's also a couple of bonus stages thrown in to spice things up. The journey isn't an easy one though. Much like Contra, one hit will count as a death, and the number of lives allowed is quite limited. Continues are limited too, so the player will have to put in some practice in order to succeed. The game really never lets up with the action and is an absolute blast from beginning to end. The game just nails what it's going for with colorful graphics, quotable sound bites, and music that will be stuck in your head for years. Sunset Riders is a certified classic, and it's a must-play if you like action games with plenty of great boss fights and surprises.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had some really awesome games back in the 80s and 90s due to their license being picked up by Konami. Where a lot of licensed games fared particularly worse, the Boys in Green enjoyed a lot of video gaming success, and Turtles in Time may be one of the best beat-em-ups of all time. And what's better, with the extra levels and some other small improvements, the SNES version is largely considered better than the original arcade version. It may not have the ability to support 4 players, but damn, it's a great looking, sounding, and playing game, and definitely one of my favorites for the Super Nintendo.
When it comes to favorite games on the Super NES, I have to go with Super Castlevania 4. It's, to me, the best Castlevania game. It shows off everything the Super NES could do and has one of the best soundtracks in the entire collection. So really, the control was perfect, and if you want something to get you in a spooky mood coming around Halloween, it's a perfect game for you.
Yeah, and if you're a weirdo like me who really loves pinball games, you can't go wrong, I love torturing him, with Jackie Crush. So, it's the sequel to Devil's Crush we never got in North America. It's super cheap to collect for, fantastic music, good use of Mode 7, great table, hard as nails. So if you want a challenge and some good old-fashioned pinball action, get yourself some Jackie Crush.
Or just go with my pick and do Super Castlevania 4 and do a good game.
Normie.
The last game I want to highlight is one of my personal favorites, even if it has its flaws. Gradius 3 is one of the first games I played for the SNES, and it's still one of the games I go back to time and time again. Yes, it has some pretty awful slowdown, and there are some technically better shooters on the system, but man, I just love it regardless. Gradius 3 has some awesome stages, excellent music, and when the game isn't slowing down to a crawl, some really cool enemies and gameplay. This is one that I am still working on a no-death run for, and I'll have it one day. Definitely a cool game, and I recommend it if you're a fan of the series. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System ceased production in North America in 1999 and Japan in 2003, which is kind of insane when you think about it. The last game released over here was a port of Frogger, which is kind of weird, but, okay. And there was some kind of graphic novel type game, or graphic interactive game, one of those picture games, story games, in Japan. If you follow retro gaming at all, you probably know what I'm talking about. I don't know. I'm not a gaming historian. I just use Wikipedia. So if you really want the actual scoop, do some research. But that's what I've found out. The SNES is still considered one of the best consoles of all time, and I'm really glad it was part of my childhood growing up. What's my favorite game on the system? Well, it's probably a toss-up between Final Fantasy VI, Super Castlevania 4, and Mega Man X. All 3 games have a very special place in my heart, and all 3 games I just love picking up and playing. I want to thank all of my collaborators for helping me out with this video, and I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great 2022, and hopefully it goes better than these last couple of years have. Thanks for watching, guys. Later.